Did you know that Usain Bolt almost didn't become the fastest man alive? Early on in his career, he experimented with longer distance races, at some point competing as a 400-meter sprinter, until he took a look at the absolutely grueling training schedule that these 400-meter athletes had to endure and thought to himself, absolutely not. And so he very quickly changed lanes to the 100-meter races and at most 200 meters, deciding that those shorter races were more his speed, so to speak. Now, the relevance of Usain's lane change is because today's hand drink solo curious wine of the day is a Chardonnay produced by an estate that most wine lovers would undeniably put in the single lane of Sauvignon Blanc specialists. That estate is Diemersdal. Yes, the Diemersdal who produce the famous estate Sauvignon Blanc that is practically the Taylor Swift of South African Sauvignon Blancs, in the sense that it is undeniably produced for the masses and loved by the masses, but it is also, much to the chagrin of certain snobs, undeniably charming. And sure, the Academy might not be ready to declare it fine art, but it certainly is a lot of fun in the glass. But today is not about Taylor Swift, nor is it about Sauvignon Blanc. It is about the Diemersdal Estate Chardonnay Reserve 2024, which is made by winemaker Brevet. Diemersdal as an estate sit high up in the Durbanville Hills, which is really a fascinating geological feature that has high altitude, easy access to the cold Atlantic Ocean, slopes with a multitude of different aspects. And while the marketing department for Durbanville wines generally would declare unequivocally that they are Sauvignon Blanc specialists, the fact that they have cool breezes, different aspects, high altitude, access to the ocean means that they can do anything well, really, if they put their minds to it. In fact, estates like Maastricht produce Pinot Noir and Cabernet Sauvignon, both at a really high level. And you can watch videos on both of those wines after this one. Diemersdal as an estate have always fascinated us at Hand Drink Solo because they are probably one of the more established brands in the Durbanville Hills region, and yet they've never used that establishment or security as an opportunity to rest on their laurels. Instead, they seem to have this indefatigable lust for wine adventure and experimentation. And there are two wines in particular that illustrate this curiosity and really desire to improve and broaden horizons for winemakers at large. The first is their winter ferment Sauvignon Blanc, which is made from juice that is frozen for almost 4 months and then thawed and fermented. Winemaker Brevet says that it initially started out as an experiment which was inspired by certain New Zealand winemakers who treat their Sauvignon Blanc juice as a kind of slush puppy for a few months before fermenting it. But here in Durbanville, they were a little too eager on the cooling process and inadvertently froze the juice solid. Of course, when that juice all thawed, what they found was that thiols had been dramatically boosted. And so in essence, you have a highly concentrated juice with which to ferment and make Sauvignon Blanc wine, not unlike the Du Toitskloof Old Vine Sauvignon Blanc, which we featured earlier this month. The second wine is perhaps a little harder to pin down from a scientific perspective, and that is the Globe Sauvignon Blanc, which is fermented using these really very impressive looking glass globes imported from Italy. And while to many these glass fermenters are just a gimmick, but there are others who swear that these glass globes provide unique fermentation dynamics that no other vessel can. I guess you'll have to taste it yourself to reach your own conclusions on that topic. But regardless of your verdict on the globe, one cannot deny that the fact that they imported these glass globes and the fact that they froze juice shows this sense of adventure and curiosity and experimentation that I was talking about. And I have all the time in the world for producers who are always trying to push the industry forward by trying new things. That said, all of their experimentations thus far have seemed to revolve around Sauvignon Blanc. So what on earth are they doing getting a wine that is scoring 94 points in the Wine Mag Old Vine Report for 2025, made from Chardonnay grapes? Well, as I hinted at earlier, Durbanville is a fascinating viticultural area with a whole lot of things going for it, and it's unsurprising given its physical characteristics that it can produce incredible Chardonnay as well as Sauvignon Blanc. But the other point that I must drive home is that that insatiable curiosity and experimentation exhibited by Brevet and the winemaking team isn't only applied to Sauvignon Blanc, which is why they are producing a number of wines very well, including this Chardonnay. But let's get into the glass and see what awaits us. So when we give this guy a sniff, well, I mean, really, to put it simply, the first thing that strikes you is just how delicious this is, which in some senses might be seen to be too friendly. And what you get is this beautiful kind of white peach. It's not overly sweet, definitely not, but it's a kind of white peach, gentle note that is mixed with a touch of fresh bread dough and then beautiful sweet vanilla spice, like perhaps a peach cobbler or a fresh baked peach themed pastry. Now that description might to most people sound downright delicious or at worst harmless. And yet what I've just said is actually quite controversial, because there is a fairly dominant subsection of the Old Vine fan club that says you should never be able to smell oak on an Old Vine wine at all, and that using new oak is sacrilegious on old vines. And this is because, as we've mentioned before, old vines have a reputation for being aromatically a little more resigned, and perhaps the idea is to keep the windows open, so to speak, to allow the gentle fruit of the wine speak. And I get all that, but honestly, I feel like in this particular wine, the vanilla spice from the oak, and bear in mind this wine was not only barrel fermented in all new oak, it was then also matured for 10 months in new oak and second fill. So Diemersdal were unapologetically oak fronted with this wine, and yet what we get is a kind of equal part relationship between vanilla spice and then fresh cut white peaches. It's beautiful. It's not that age-old thing of, the fruit is lovely and the oak supports it. I feel like this is more a kind of partnership where oak spice and fruit work together the same way it would in a peach cobbler. Now, let's give it a sip and see if that balance maintains onto the palate. Well, the texture is all there. There's lovely weight on the palate in the way that it feels. But the way that the flavors arrange themselves on the palate reminds me of a conversation I had with someone recently about food wines. Now, I've always seen the term food wine as a sort of backhanded compliment. Like, yeah, this wine is nice if you have food, otherwise it's boring. But this particular individual explained what they meant when they said, no, a food wine is a wine where you can taste it, but it leaves space for food. So this wine is not this concentrated, intense kind of kaleidoscope of fruit aromas and flavors lined up super tightly, but rather it's slightly more spread out. There's a chewy texture to it, but the flavors of stone fruit and then what segues into a little bit of citrus almost has a space where food might fit. Now, perhaps you have no idea what I'm talking about, and I guess you'll have to try it for yourself to see. But there is a sense that everything on the wine is gentler without necessarily being bland. And even as it moves towards the finish, the initial kind of sweet white peach segues into a little bit of tart apricot and citrus. And by the finish, you've got a really gloriously lingering tail end that keeps your jowls tingling. But again, it's not this wild, in-your-face, bright, intense fruit affair. It's a slightly more sedate, gently paced evolution from stone fruit through to citrus and tart apricot into this tingling finish, all the while being carried along by some prominent but not overpowering oak and nutmeg spice, both of which would have come from either the fermentation barrels or the maturation barrels. So in case I wasn't clear enough, I honestly feel like this is an old vine wine that works because of the oak alongside it rather than in spite of it, and not because the oak overpowers, but just because oak can add a delightful additional element. Now, that's all we have time for discussing this wine, but while you pour yourself another glass, I've left links to 2 videos, one of which discusses the Maastricht Pinot Noir and the other which discusses the Maastricht Cabernet Sauvignon, because this little Durbanville estate is showing how we can use Durbanville's incredible viticultural aspects and topographical aspects in order to produce wines from a range of different cultivars. So until next time, stay curious and always drink niche.